What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke aka Dansgwait here, and I have a special video for you guys in which I will be showing you the 3 deadliest moves in Final Fantasy history. My criteria here for a move being the most deadly is a move that is capable of killing any enemy in the game in a single hit. And so because of this quite specific criteria, moves like Odin's Zantetsuken are not going to be included in this list of 3. Because that's the kind of move where yes, it can dispatch an enemy in a single hit, but it will not work across every single enemy in the game. So you can't defeat, let's say, the final storyline boss with it, or any super bosses with that move. So these 3 are moves so powerful that no matter how difficult the boss is, you will be able to use this move and gain a victory in a single hit. So without further ado, let's get into it and talk about the 3 deadliest moves in Final Fantasy history. Okay, so I want to kick things off with an honourable mention for a move that Setzer has in Final Fantasy VI. It's slot related, and I'm not going to go too in deep into this, but basically if you roll a 777, then you get something called Joker's Doom, and this eliminates most of the enemies / bosses that you can face in the game. But the reason I did include it in the top 3 is because there is a specific list of encounters / bosses for which the 777 doesn't work. So you already need to do a little bit of manipulation, RNG manipulation, to get the 777 consistently, and if you don't do that, the percentage chances are very low. The second part of this is that there is technically a way to use Setzer slots to kill any enemy in the game. The way you do it is to reverse it, but the reason I didn't want to include it is again because it's more of an exploit and an RNG manipulation trick, and also it relies on the fact that you have to roll 7-7 bar and not 777. So normally 7-7 bar will hit your own characters, you'll end up taking out everyone in your own party, but you can manipulate it so that it ends up hitting enemies instead of your own party. So because it's a different roll from the first one, and because there's a list of enemies that are immune to the actual 777 roll, it didn't feel like it was quite in the same category. But when you use these 2 things in tandem, the 7-7 bar and the 777, plus the RNG manipulation that you can do for it, you can pretty much take out every single enemy in Final Fantasy VI using Setzer, and for that reason I did want to include it as an honourable mention as well. Number 3 is one that I think you will find quite surprising, because it's one that I didn't encounter at all in my playthrough, and under normal circumstances it's almost impossible to get. But that being said, it's definitely worth talking about, and I will be explaining why. The move can be performed by Cait Sith from Final Fantasy VII. Now that might surprise you at this point, but the move in question is called Game Over, and it comes from Cait Sith's slots. The reason why it's probably not as well known as a move that's coming later on is because the developers knew how deadly this move was, and so they did everything they could to make sure that it was not something that you could get very easily. Game Over, as the name would suggest, is something that if you roll it, you can take out every single enemy that you can encounter in Final Fantasy VII in a single hit. This includes the final Sephiroth battles, and it also includes enemies like Emerald Weapon and Ruby Weapon. Before I talk about this move, I want to thank 48 Productions, because it was his video that I watched where I was able to get a greater understanding of how the mechanics work. I'll link the particular video to it. He gives you a really nice demonstration of how it works, but I will be paraphrasing and simplifying his explanation of the Cait Sith Game Over move. The developers wanted to make sure that this was something really difficult to pull off, even if you were particularly talented at getting the slots you wanted. So the way it works is that you have 3 slots, and each slot has a third of Cait Sith's face, and if you manage to line up all 3 of the slots, then you will potentially get Game Over, and you will be able to perform that move on any enemy and wipe them out. Now there's 2 different ways to analyze this particular move. The first is the legitimate way, and the second is the exploit way. The legitimate way is one in which you have to get extremely good at pulling off the slots, or you have to get extremely lucky at pulling off the slots, or both. Let's say you manage to line up 2 out of the 3 faces, and you only have the 3rd one left. Now the game puts something in place to make sure that there is an extremely low probability of that 3rd face connecting and you being able to pull off the Game Over move. It has something called the Evil Flag or the Black Flag, I think it goes by different names. Now what I've been able to understand from this flag is that it's the game's way of basically stopping you from getting good enough at the slots to just be able to get Game Over every single time you do it just out of pure skill and muscle memory. Now what it does is that it has a look at the slots that you've already got, and depending on how you've performed so far, if there is a chance that you could line up 3 Cait Sith slots and get the game over, this particular flag will check the game time that you have in seconds. Now if this game time is divisible by 64, then it will allow you to get game over if you manage to line the slots up correct. Under any other circumstance, even if you get all 3 of the Cait Sith faces lined up, it will not allow you to use the game over move. So this is sort of a fail-safe to stop people from mastering these slots and being able to use game over whenever they want against any enemy. So once again, if you're looking at the legitimate way to do it, if you're not using any exploits or you don't know about any exploits, you're just a regular player of the game that hasn't researched it, mastering the slots enough to even get the timing correct to be able to get all 3 of the Cait Sith faces, plus this black flag which gives you a 1 in 64 chance, when you combine these 2 things together, as it's intended by the game and for newer players that haven't researched the exploits, it is almost impossible to get game over to be used by Cait Sith. But the reason why it's extremely deadly is because there is a way to exploit the game to pretty much be able to get game over whenever you want. Now again, the best way to see this is through 4/8's video, but as a quick explanation, if you mash square while the rolls are happening, you're able to slow down the rolls and you're able to see them slowly progress through the slots. And with a little practice over time, you'll get better at controlling these rolls and you'll be able to pull off whichever slot you want. This also works for the battle arena, and it will also work for Cait Sith slots. So using this particular exploit to slow down the slots, you'll be able to line up all 3 slots. But it's not quite that easy. The game will let you line up all 3 of the slots for Cait Sith's game over, but ordinarily, because of this flag situation, your odds still remain 1 in 64 to be able to pull it off. So even if on screen you look like you've got all 3 of the slots, the game will reject it. Now this is where another content creator on YouTube called Garland the Great comes in. He's another legend of the Final Fantasy community. He discovered a second part of this exploit which allows you to bypass this as well, and guarantees you pulling off the game over move if you manage to nail this particular thing. So once you line up all 3 of the slots, if you press circle very quickly after you've lined them up, so you're holding down square, you've got the slot that you want, then you quickly let go of square and start mashing circle really quickly once you've lined up the 3 Cait Sith faces, and once you pull that off, there is a high probability that you'll be able to land a game over against any enemy in the game. Now the reason I rank this in 3rd place is of course because you need an exploit to pull it off, and without the exploit it's almost impossible, and it's something that the developers went to great lengths to try to protect, but it's kind of a shame that they left this exploit available and people are still able to kind of abuse it and manipulate the slots to be able to get the move to work. But because it requires an exploit and without it, it's not really something that's particularly feasible or usable or potentially a strategy for winning, that's why it comes 3rd. But in terms of what it's capable of doing across the entire game and the way it can be used to defeat even the strongest, most powerful enemies in the game, as a singular move, it is one of the 3 deadliest moves in Final Fantasy history. Now once again, the next move in the list is one that you probably haven't encountered too much in your own playthroughs. This one comes from Final Fantasy VIII, and it is Selphie's move called The End. As the name would suggest, The End is another move that literally works on every single boss and enemy in the game, including, let's say, the Ultimecia final boss battle and Omega Weapon. There are videos online of it being used to defeat these guys, and for that reason it goes down as one of the deadliest moves in Final Fantasy history. So let's talk a little bit more about The End and how it works and why it's not number 1 on this list, given the fact that it can take out everything in the game. Once again, it comes down to slots and probability, and the odds for this one are very low once again. Normally it ranges anywhere from 1 in 256 for Selphie to be able to roll that particular move on her turn, to 1 in 64. So 1 out of 256 to 1 out of 64, again, as a strategy for defeating a very powerful enemy, it's not really a go-to strategy. I mean, 1 in 64 is less than 2%, so it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to pull it off in that particular battle. Now, one thing that does make it more interesting, and one of the main reasons why I would place it above Cait Sith's move, is because once again, not only is the probability higher in terms of the raw numbers, but you can also repeat it a bit more easily than you can repeat Cait Sith's move. So if you roll the dice, you don't get the end. Then if you can keep Selphie alive, you'll be able to roll it again on her next turn. So for that reason, I think it's definitely more effective and more deadly than Cait Sith's attack, and because it can take out every single enemy in the game, it is definitely worthy of being on this list. One little interesting piece of trivia about this move though is that there is no legitimate exploit that can be used across different platforms, but there is one very neat trick that I saw Dark Kefka use, another legendary Final Fantasy YouTuber that many of you will know. Now I believe this only works on the PS1 version of the game, like if you're playing on a PS1 console, but if you lift the lid during a specific moment, then you're able to create a situation in which you get an infinite number of rolls. You basically stop time, and you can get Selphie to roll as many times as you want. So that's super cool, and it's a very sort of cheap and external hardware related exploit, but it's definitely worthy of mentioning it. And so if you are playing it on that sort of platform and you know of this exploit, technically you can use the end as many times as you want on whoever you want, whenever you want. So I thought that was a pretty interesting exploit too. So we come to the deadliest move in Final Fantasy history, and unsurprisingly, in my opinion, that move is Yojimbo's Zanmato from Final Fantasy X. Of course, the most compelling criteria is the fact that it can take out every single enemy in the game without fail, including Penance. I'm sure most of us have seen the video, or at least had it appear in our YouTube feeds, where someone takes out Penance using Zanmato in a single hit. I've done it myself in the No Sphere Grid Dark Aeons run that I did. Since No Sphere Grid Penance is impossible, I summoned Yojimbo and used Zanmato on it just for kicks so they could complete the challenge. So it's something that's definitely been done by a lot of us before, and what I think makes it special compared to the others is that you have much greater control of the parameters for how you can get Zanmato to happen. It's not like Selphie and Cait Sith's moves, which rely on like a slot system and RNG, and you have to get lucky with them. With Cait Sith, if you're trying to do it legitimately, as the game intended for it, it's almost impossible. You need an exploit to use it at a higher percentage. With Yojimbo Zanmato, you can guarantee Zanmatos against almost every single enemy in the game if you fit certain criteria. These are criteria that you have control over, such as how much gil you pay Yojimbo, his overdrive gauge, and his compatibility with Yuna. So for the fact that you can do all of these things, you can potentially have chances as high as 60, 70, 80% of being able to Zanmato Penance in a single hit. So because the percentages can be so high for Yojimbo Zanmato, to me it puts it in a different league compared to something like The End or Game Over from Cait Sith. Especially when you don't factor in the exploits as well, which were unintentional by the developer. That's another major reason why I put Zanmato at the top of my deadliest moves list. If there's something I've missed, if there's this really obscure move that has like this astronomically small chance of happening that I've not picked up on, of course feel free to let me know in the comments, but based on the research I've done and the people that I've spoken to, these are the only 3 moves that fit the criteria of being able to defeat every single enemy in the game with a single hit. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will be making a future video about the mechanics behind Yojimbo Zanmato. How does it all work? How does the game calculate whether or not he's going to use it? And how you can optimize and train Yojimbo so that you can get him to use Zanmato pretty regularly against even the Dark Aeons and Penance. So that's something that I hope you guys will enjoy. But for now, that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.